Our panel tonight, the leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage, the Conservative Communities and Local Government Minister, Penny Mordaunt, Labour's Shadow International Development Secretary, Mary Cray, the Sunday Times columnist and Associate Editor, Camilla Cavendish, and the comedian and campaigner, Russell Brand.
Hello. Is the petty adversarial nature of politics causing its own decline?
Russell Brand.
I think that's a good question, mate. I think to a degree you might be right that it is causing its decline. I'm assuming that that's your opinion. I felt like it was a loaded question, but that you felt that the petty adversarial nature is contributing to its decline, and also it's creating the rise of, I suppose, more extremist views. I sometimes think that people in our country feel detached from what takes place in Parliament, that the issues being discussed and the manner in which they're discussed are detached from ordinary people. I think we get a bit tired of seeing poor attendances in Parliament for issues that we care about and high attendance when they're talking about their pay rises. So I think that petty adversarial nature that you're referring to is, I think it is contributing to decline.
OK. Nigel Farage.
Well, I would certainly agree with Jonathan's question in the sense that, yes, it's very petty, because we now debate, what colour tie is Ed Miliband or David Cameron wearing, or come up to the election, which hairdresser does their wife go to? And it's become very petty, and that's because we're not doing real politics anymore. We're not discussing big political issues. 25, 30 years ago, there was a big difference between left and right. Big fundamental ideological differences. Whether Michael Foot became Prime Minister or Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister fundamentally affected the country, for good or bad, depending on your point of view. And we've seen the growth of a career professional political class who do the same degrees and who have never had a job in their lives, go straight into back offices aged 23 and become career politicians.
All right.
A lack of breadth of experience and no proper ideology in politics.
Does the cap fit, Mary Cray?
Well, I don't think politics is petty, and it's not something that I chose as a career path, as a so-called career politician. I think Nigel fits that bill much better than I do.
Oh, please. How on earth do you get to that?
Well, I mean, you've been a member of the European Parliament, you've changed parties. I mean, you can argue
I spent 20 years in business. Did Ed Miliband spend 20 years in business? He didn't spend 6 weeks in business, did he? I mean, come on. I mean, really?
That's the sort of petty political point scoring that I think the questioner
No, that's fundamental.
I think politics has always been like that, where I've watched debates and it's always been petty, and I just think that it is going in the right direction with more women, more people from different types of backgrounds. It just needs to be more like the people, and we are going in the right direction. We just all need to get involved, and it doesn't help when people are told not to vote, in my opinion.
Russell Brand famously said, don't vote. I don't know whether it's still your view, is it?
Well, I think the important issue is I, like 70% of the people at the last election in this country, didn't vote because we didn't feel engaged.
Right.
Yeah, the European election, that counts. That's why we got that dude at the end of the table, who, by the way, had the perfect training to be a politician because he spent, as he said himself, his time in business and the city, the people that most of us think politicians truly work for. Now, the reason I said that I don't vote... The reason I said that I don't vote is I don't see the interests of ordinary people being represented. My mate Lee Pickett, who works for the Fire Brigade Union, he can't get his voice heard. Old Penny there is presiding over legislation that means that firemen are going to have to work an extra 5 years. They're really tired from doing the, going into burning buildings and whatnot, so they want them to do another 5 years of that. This is an agenda that is not met by politicians that, as we understand them. So I suppose it becomes, for fellas like Nigel there, become more popular.
Yeah, but what the questioner was saying, or what the comment from the back was, that people should vote, and the mistake is to urge people not to vote, as you do.
Well, what I say, David, is give us something to vote for.
It's an interesting statistic, just to pick up your point. The amazing, inspirational
girl who picked up Malala, who picked up youngest ever recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. She has on her fund that does amazing work in providing education opportunities for girls. She has 117,000 Twitter followers. Russell has 9 million. So although, you know, probably I don't agree with, apart from my admiration of firefighters, much that Russell probably
Pay
says,
their pensions then, love.
Well, we can come to that.
Excuse the sexist language, I'm working on that.
I think you have a huge opportunity, and I really wish...
You have a huge opportunity. You're a member of Parliament. I'm a comedian. You could be in there representing
Well,
people.
Can you let people finish? Because one of the things that people really don't like is men talking over women on these types of shows, and our voices not being heard. And it's a classic of question time.
And can you let me chair it?
Sorry.
Come to me, and I'll bring you in up there.
A lot of politicians, and quite often the media, I'm afraid, are not interested in detail. So I'm always shocked, actually, to be honest, when I meet some MPs who haven't read the bill that they're voting on. The EU Constitution, which was a brilliant example of that, was a really important thing that was going through the House of Commons, and I would meet people and I'd say, well, have you looked at, Clause X or whatever? They hadn't. Sometimes that is very worrying. The other thing that I think upsets all of us is that there are quite a lot of MPs who haven't run anything and who don't seem to understand the real world, and it does worry me sometimes that they therefore don't necessarily understand what their actions are going to lead to. And also, they're not very good at getting decisions through the machine.
So you expect young people like myself to engage in politics when there is such behaviour being shown and displayed by politicians that we see?
What effect does it have on you?
It makes me quite disillusioned, to be honest, and I think, to be honest, a lot of young people don't engage because it just doesn't speak to them. And
Nigel Farage? Want to pick up on that point?
Australia is a very healthy, functioning democracy where there's high voter turnout and where there are real choices at elections, and the way they speak to each other in their parliament is pretty shocking. So
And the way you speak in the European Parliament is sometimes quite shocking, isn't it?
That says nothing. I mean, the European Parliament has been as dull as ditch water. I would like to think that some of my helpful, friendly advice has, generally gingered the place up a little bit. No, I mean, quite honestly, if there are real passions on display and real argument happening, and if that argument is at times very heated and very, very vocal, I don't think that of itself is a bad thing.
OK. The man at the back there, in the back row, and then I come to you, sir, 2 rows down. Yes.
Just picking up on Nigel Farage's point about real politics, I'm wondering, I understand you're running for the MP for South Thanet, is that correct? I'm just wondering what someone who's worth millions of pounds is planning to do for one of the most deprived parts of Kent in terms of regenerating
the area.
Sadly, I don't think it's relevant to ask him.
Sadly for you, I'm not the wealthy one on this panel this evening, all right? I'm really not.
Wealthier than the people in Thanet, though.
Yeah.
Wealthier than some of them, that's certainly true. But I'm not coming into...
With great respect, we're not fighting the general election in Thanet here just tonight. Whatever you may think, there'll be time for that, no doubt.
You mentioned the fact that ideologies are going to be really important in the next election, and maybe that will actually move apart again. But is the real issue the fact that for the last 25 years or more, every party is becoming so alike that they've got nothing to really argue about in Parliament? So all they do is kind of squabble and bicker, and at the end of the day don't achieve much.
And that's how you feel it is?
Yes.
Is Britain really overcrowded?
A very simple question. Is Britain really overcrowded? And in the light of a report today saying it absolutely wasn't and needed lots more immigration, which came from the Office for Budget Responsibility. Nigel Farage.
It's interesting, the chap that produced that report today was the same chap who in 2008 said that the upcoming recession would be minute. So he hasn't got a very good track record. Look, if you fly into Gatwick, you'll see lots of green spaces. That is certainly true. However, if you have a country in which the population goes up as a direct result of immigration, what you find is not a shortage of green fields, if that's where you wanted to build houses. You find a shortage of primary school places. You find a shortage of GP surgeries. We have fewer GPs per head than any other country in Europe today. you find congestion, whether it's on the roads or the London Underground or wherever you go. And what you find is that actually you're constantly playing catch-up, and really the general quality of life for the massive population has gone down. So I think those comments today were wholly irresponsible. And what we've seen, I mean, it's quite interesting to think that, you know, in 1990, the population of this country was 55 million. It is now between 62 and 63 million. That is a massive, massive increase. And I think ordinary folk going about their lives are feeling it. And I think, having a proper immigration policy, controlling the numbers, doing what nearly 200 countries in the world do, namely controlling the numbers that come and the type of people that come, is the answer.
Right. Russell Brand.
I sometimes feel worried about you, Nigel Farage. But the reason I feel worried is because I know a lot of people are frightened in our country. I know a lot of people are feeling afraid and frustrated. And there is a sense that there is a corrupt group in our country using our resources, taking away our jobs, taking away our housing, not paying taxes, exploiting us. And there is an economic elite that this man's party is funded by, that this man is comes from background working in the city. Let me tell you something. There was an economic crash and a lot of money was lost. His mates in the city farted. Nigel Farage is pointing at immigrants and the disabled and holding his nose. Immigrants are not causing the economic problems and suffering we're experiencing. As much as any of us, I enjoy seeing Nigel Farage in a boozer with a pint and a fag, laughing off his latest scandals about breastfeeding or whatever. I enjoy it. But this man is not a cartoon character. He ain't Del Boy. He ain't Arthur Daly. He is a pound shop Enoch Powell, and we got to watch him.
Well, Russell, that's all well and good, and you've got your point of view. The question was, is Britain overcrowded? And do you think I'm wrong? I mean, do you not think?
Nigel, can I not be more clear, mate? I think you're wrong. I come from the kind of community...
This is called Question Time, this programme, right?
Well, tonight you could have another name.
And what happens is, members of the audience ask questions, and we're expected to answer them. You haven't answered this lady's question. Do you think Britain's overcrowded and there is a strain on public resources and people's quality of life?
We need more money for public resources.
Well, where's it going to come from?
It's not overcrowded. It's going to come... Oh, I'm so glad you asked, mate. Since the financial crash, banker bonuses have exceeded £80 billion. George Osborne, your Chancellor, campaigned to stop caps being placed on banker bonuses. At the same time, there were austerity cuts against the poorest among us, the disabled, people that we need to be looking after. We need to close tax loopholes which are exploited by big corporations. There's money. I've got money now. I've seen rich people. There's plenty of money out there. It's just not being distributed.
Okay. You say the thing. Yes.
And I don't like people preaching that I am any part responsible for anything. I've never heard him criticised the disabled.
I never have.
OK? Never. No. OK? And you are a campaigner, yeah? I'm going to go back to the last question. Please let me finish.
Mate.
Stand. Stand for Parliament. If you're going to campaign, then stand. OK? OK, you have the media profile for it. Do it.
My problem would be, mate, I'd stand for Parliament, but I'd be scared that I'd become one of them. I know what side of the argument...
No, I'm sorry. You've full addiction. You've full addiction and you've beaten it, OK? You can't preach that. That is rubbish.
Mate,
You cannot preach that.
I'm not preaching.
Well, you are. You've attacked him, OK?
Yeah.
OK? And you've attacked him, and you've attacked everybody that stands for his party.
I do.
I
do.
We're
trying.
I'm sorry.
I'm not attacking people
they are people on the street. Oh, are they? Are they? Rubbish. Rubbish. I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, it's the general public that are standing for him.
Trying to blame immigrants for the cutbacks because of his rich.
Russell, you've got some voters here, mate. You ought to stand. I mean, these are your voters. They're lovely people, aren't they? They're lovely people.
I just hear for a voice up here. You, sir, on the gangway.
Behave yourself over
Yeah.
there. The point I want to make to Russell is that you say you claim to sort of stand up for the working classes, but you've got to understand that it's the working classes that have been hit the hardest by immigration, mass immigration. You know, wage compression, the change in communities over a short period of time has led to, you know, tension within communities. So you've got to appreciate that actually, you know, it's all right to say, you know, criticising UKIP and Nigel Farage, but actually it's the people at the bottom of society that have been hit the hardest by immigration.
I'm telling you, mate, honestly, I come from the same community as you come from. I've been very lucky and I've had a few breaks and I've got a few quid now. And I'm telling you that immigration has always been happening. What happened in 2008 was very unique. If I thought... It's the scale. My friend, I swear to you, if I thought, listen, try this, for 2 years, turn your focus to corruption in the city, turn your focus to apathetic politicians, turn yourself to the corruptions going on there, and if in 2 years' time your life ain't got better, campaigning against the people that have wealth and power, not those that have very little, if it's still the same, I'll come with you and campaign. But I'm telling you, I know where the power is, I know where the money is, I know what we've got to do.
We've said we got some things wrong on immigration. We want to control immigration and we want to control the effects of immigration. But as the daughter of somebody who came here to work from Ireland in the 1960s and who paid his way and contributed to this economy, I think that some of the tone of what you say, Nigel, about immigrants and blaming them for all sorts of random problems is not the way our country wants to go. And when we bring people in from outside, companies bringing people in from outside the EU should be training a young person in our country to take up those jobs. We want to get rid of the agencies that only recruit from Eastern Europe and bring people in to undercut wages. We want to put an end to that wage exploitation. And for people who think there's no point in voting, that's the difference between Labour and the Conservatives at the next election.
Mary, the whole point of this, and I'm pleased that you are now apologising, because when the doors opened to 8 former communist countries, your government said it would lead to an increase of 13,000 people a year coming into Britain, and it was hundreds of thousands a year.
We got things wrong on immigration.
Okay,
but those immigrants came in, worked and paid their taxes.
Here is the point. How on earth can you have school provision, housing provision? How can you plan for the future if you have an open door to nearly 500 million people?
35%
that is why
in our National Health Service,
but that is why we need control.
Of the people in the National Health Service are from overseas.
Yes, and
what would happen to the National Health Service?
But they can have work permits. The point is, are we overcrowded? Do we have too few resources? The job of government is to plan for the future. You cannot plan if you have open door immigration.
All right, I want to go back to that point. I tend to go round in circles. I want to go back to the woman up there who was trying to get in before. Up at the back there, yes.
I think we need to cap immigration. We've got Canterbury prison now that is full of immigrants from outside UK, and it's full. We should vet people coming into this country. It's not about stopping people coming into the country, it's about vetting them. We need to know that they have skills set for the country, there's jobs for them to come in. We shouldn't have to support them when they come over. They should be able to contribute to the country, not segregate themselves. I fully support people coming over to work, to integrate into this country. We have one of the most open doors, but we need to vet people coming into this country. We don't want people with criminal histories. We don't want rapists. We don't want murderers. We don't want them. You are, lady, you are the rudest woman that I've ever met. Go and sit down and be quiet. It is nothing at all to do with racism, at all. That's why you need to back off and mind what you say. It's nothing to do with racism. It's about It's not even about numbers, it's vetting people. We need to make sure that people come into this country, they have a skill set for this country.
When you say it's not about numbers, then, in reply to the question, is Britain really overcrowded, is your answer yes or no?
Where I live, yes.
You contribute to the system before you can have social housing or you can access particular benefits, those kind of things.
Sorry, that's only being raised now because somebody else has got the backbone to actually say something about that. I don't agree. I'm sorry, Nigel. I don't agree with everything he says, but I do agree with the fact that he's brought up something that a lot of people feel very, very strongly about. It's not necessarily numbers. It's a whole band of things.
What role should the private sector play in the future of the NHS?
What role should the private sector play in the future of the NHS? This is a hotly contested issue, of course, in the next election, one of the ones we were talking about. Mary Cray.
I think that we need to repeal the Conservative and Liberal Democrat health bill, and we have made that a promise in our election campaign. We do not want to see it opened up.
Do you want no more private involvement in the NHS?
What the government has done with their top-down reorganisation that they promised wouldn't happen before the last election, and which happened pretty soon afterwards because everyone was too scared to say that they didn't understand what Andrew Lansley was talking about, is that they've opened the NHS, every NHS service up to any willing provider. That means any company from anywhere can come in and run our National Health Service. That is a recipe for inefficiency, it's a recipe for cost going up, and it's a recipe for privatisation and co-payments, which is the ideological end of this Conservative and Lib Dem coalition.
Do you want to see the private sector playing a part in the NHS or not?
The private sector was used by Labour in government to tackle certain problems. Health waiting lists where people waiting 18 months for cataract operations and going blind. Hip replacements where people were living in pain, and heart operations where they were dying before they were getting their treatment. We use the private sector to effectively stop the consultants from having large waiting lists and doing it. We bought in bulk purchasing, using the NHS's purchasing power to tackle those NHS waiting lists. And yes, there is a place for it, but not opening up every single service. And of course, in some services...
And running Hinchinbrook Hospital.
And in some services, like sexual health and some mental health services, the voluntary sector is doing a magnificent job in that. But it cannot just be come one, come all.
But you were the only people to privatise a hospital.
No, that was done after we left government.
But it was done when a choice was left only between two private providers and the NHS had been excluded.
There were 3 providers that were in the race when we left government.
It will be about the shareholder in the end. It won't be about the patient. You shouldn't be making profit out of illness. It's as simple as that.
Nigel Farage.
Well, I agree with Camilla. There is an entirely false debate going on. I think Labour have chosen to make the NHS at the absolute centrepiece of their general election campaign. And so the word privatisation is bandied about without really meaning anything. I mean, this is something that I've thought about. We've got an ageing population. The demand for health services is going to go up over the next few years hugely from where we are now. I've looked at, what happens in France, what happens in the Netherlands. They tend to use more insurance-based systems. We as a party have decided that the NHS being free at the point of care is absolutely vital, and that actually the involvement of the private sector that we saw under Labour and continuing now has not thus far been a great success. Take the PFI contracts, the private finance initiatives. New hospitals were built, but rather than going to borrow money, on the gilts market, in that horrible city place where they're all crooks and everything, and rather than doing that, what Labour did was to go to really rich people in private equity groups. So we borrowed 50 billion sterling to build new hospitals, which we built, and no question, but the repayments on that are 300 billion sterling. We have outsourced all sorts of contracts like cleaning of hospitals, and look at what the results have been. So my answer to the question is, in the short term, rather than outsourcing to the private sector the functions of the National Health Service, why don't we get a grip and run what we have better and do it ourselves and not make so much big cash for private equity.
Okay. And so you'll drop the idea of insurance policies
No,
for
we had
paying for your
no,
health.
we had a debate about the idea, and it's quite right that all political parties, before they formulate policies, should have a big, open debate, and that nothing should be off the table. You should debate and
But you're
discuss
saying it's off the
everything.
table now, as far as you.
I'm saying that we will fight a general election, saying we think that the outsourcing to private firms that we've seen under the last two governments has not delivered good value for money or good patient health care.
But you still want free at the point of
Absolutely.
demand or supply.
Absolutely.
All right. Russell Brand.
I think that, like everyone, that the NHS is one of the great cornerstones of our culture. I spent some time in America and you're charged for healthcare there, and it seems sort of unnatural to receive a bill after you've been bandaged up in an ostentatious manner in an accent. I think I spoke to some care workers recently in this care workers union. They said since their local health authority had private engagement, their wages had been cut by 9% and agency workers on minimum wage had been brought in. They said that they couldn't provide the care they needed to patients. So obviously I think that profit, as that gentleman says, has no business anywhere near healthcare. I think it should be kept well away from it. I've spent a lot of time in NHS hospitals over the last year. They're doing incredible work, and I think that it's something that we should preserve and fight for. I'm very worried that there are 71 members of Parliament currently that stand to benefit from further privatisation of the NHS, and this makes me feel further disillusioned with our current parliamentary process.
Okay. Tony Morden?
Can I just make a point about life sciences?
Yeah,
It's a really important point.
Go on then.
You say the NHS is important. How come you've just got an 11% pay rise when the nurses were awarded 1% and the nurse I spoke to today hasn't even got that, and she hasn't had a pay rise for 3 years?
I completely understand that. I can't speak for my... Listen. I can't speak for my other colleagues in Parliament, but I can tell you, if I am an MP in the next Parliament, when a pay rise comes in, I will not take it. I will not take it, and I will tell you why. In politics, we put ourselves up to make decisions for people, to try and get people to change their behaviour, to persuade a business to set up another business, to employ more people, to take risks. We're there to try and persuade people who maybe haven't been in work to go and get into work. And I think we would not have credibility doing that if we were to do something like that.
So that's not an answer, is it?
He doesn't look like that. Let him on. You don't seem satisfied with their answer.
No, not at all.
What's the problem?
She hasn't answered it. I expected her to say it wasn't their decision. It was a pay sector board.
Well, that's true, but it's my decision whether to take it or not.
The nurses had a pay sector board as well, and the civil service. I'm a civil servant. I haven't had a pay rise.
Would education and social mobility improve if we returned to a system that included grammar schools, as we still have in Kent?
Ah, yes. Kent has, I think, 23 or so grammar schools. A quarter of the schools, secondary schools, are grammar schools. And would education and social mobility improve? That's the key point. Social mobility and education improve under grammar schools. Russell Brand, you start on this one.
Education, health, a living wage, these things are all rights. These are not things that we should be squabbling over. I think that grammar schools, I don't know much about it. I went to a comprehensive, I got a relatively good education. In the realm of education, I'm deeply concerned about students' tuition fees. The privatisation of education seems to me another shameful slur on our great nation. The grammar school thing, for me, well, I worry with the UKIP scenario. There's a stagnancy in politics today. People don't seem to have very good ideas. But Nigel Farage and UKIP are not the future. It is a nostalgia act. He don't have no good ideas. Grammar schools, no grammar schools. Proper education for all people, whether they're at comprehensives or at universities. And it should certainly be free, not 40 grand a year like he paid.
Right. Nigel Farage?
I think the answer to the question is a big yes. A very big yes indeed. Social mobility in this country has declined. The 7% of people whose parents are rich enough to send them to the private schools are now dominating the media, business. Even over half our gold medal winners in the Olympics went to those 7% of schools. And it's like, you know, we've gone back 50 years in terms of the class structure of who is running Britain. I have no doubt in my mind that one of the biggest social mistakes we've made in the last 50 years is the wanton destruction of hundreds of superb grammar schools up and down this country. And to see the Ofsted report yesterday saying that 2/3 of our brightest young men and women are not achieving their best at school in the comprehensive system says to me we are wasting the talent of tens of thousands of our best and brightest people every year, and that is a tragedy for this country. In Kent, people are fortunate. There is the opportunity of grammar schools, although when we tried through a petition to extend a new grammar school in Sevenoaks, sadly, the government vetoed it. But I think that opportunity... Well, they're now saying...
But Nigel, the Ofsted Chief Inspector, Wilshaw, said last year that grammar schools are, I use his words, stuffed full of middle-class kids.
Well, that's
in other words, there's not a... why did he say that?
Well, that's because there are so few grammar schools in this country that actually people move to catchment areas that have got grammar schools, forcing up the house prices, making it middle class. If every town in this country had a grammar school, it would not be a class or house price issue, and that opportunity would be available to everybody in this country. Okay. It would be one of the best things we could do.
You're in the middle at the back. Up there at the very back in the middle. You've had your hand up some time. Yes.
I'd just like to say that I went from a Catholic school to the grammar school here in Canterbury, and for anyone on the panel that thinks that grammar schools shouldn't be, you know, mandatory is just ridiculous. And I can tell you the difference is people succeed better when they're at a grammar school.
Time's up, and I get ticked off if I go on over an hour. I don't know why.